In this edition of the Primal Cooking series, we're making home-raised, processed, and cooked coq au vin. If you can't tell, I'm a little bit excited to be making this dish. The chicken that we're using for this dish was raised here right on our homestead. We were hoping the chick would turn into a hen, but instead he turned into a cockerel, and a mean one at that. So yesterday, we slaughtered and processed the bird right here in our homestead. This is the first time I personally processed any of our animals here in the homestead. This was a really big first for us, and now I'm really excited to be taking our harvest and turning it into our dinner tonight. With coq au vin being a classic French dish, I run the risk of getting some criticism from some purist foodies by making it a primal coq au vin. But really the only change we're making to convert this to a primal dish is we're just changing the thickening agent. But because I had some difficulty in sourcing some of the ingredients, I did have to make a couple other alterations that are less than ideal. But that's enough for the disclaimer. Let's just get right into it. Let's go make some coq au vin. I've been corrected on my pronunciation since originally recording this. I was saying coq au vin, but apparently it's pronounced coq au vin. Please forgive my poor friend's pronunciation. Alright, into the meal. Here are the ingredients I'm using to make this. Starting off, we have the chicken. It's parted out into breast, wings, thighs, legs. I have the chicken marinating in organic red wine. Here I have a sliced onion. Traditionally, the recipe calls for pearl onions, but they aren't available in our local grocery, so I just went with a regular one. We also have carrots, mushrooms, and then we have our poor substitute for lardon. Yeah, so about the lardon, that's what's typically used, which is basically cubed, cured pork belly. Often here in the United States, bacon is just substituted, and it's a perfectly fine substitute. Sadly, I can't find any store-bought bacon that meets my requirements. Because of that, we often cure our own bacon here at home, but I don't have any available right now. So I did the best I could with adding some pork element to it and used some leftover pork leg roast that I had from last night's dinner. It's totally not the same thing, but you gotta do what you gotta do. In addition, we have a cup of homemade chicken stock, salt, pepper, some lard for cooking oil, thyme, chopped parsley, 4 cloves of garlic, and 3 tablespoons of butter. And to keep this dish primal, I'm using arrowroot powder to make a slurry. We'll talk about that later. At a minimum of 4 to 6 hours before I start cooking, I pour 2 cups of red wine over the chicken and place in the refrigerator to marinate. Marinating overnight is fine, but the results are quite similar with just a few hours of marinating. Normally I'd start with cooking the bacon and using the oil from the bacon for searing the chicken, but that isn't an option this time for me. Instead, I use lard in my heated enamel cast iron brazier. I transfer the chicken to a plate and season both sides with salt and pepper. Now it's time to get some color on the chicken. It takes a little longer to brown the chicken since it's wet from the wine. I sear each side for 5 to 6 minutes, trying to get a little color on the meat. Afterward, I remove the chicken back to the plate. Next up, the mushrooms. I sauteed these guys for about 10 minutes, getting out all the moisture. It looks like I need to deglaze a little, so I add some red wine. I'm just scraping the fond. This is the good stuff. I'm just scraping it off the surface of the brazier so it incorporates better into the dish. Now the onions and carrots join the party. I just sweat these guys out a little before adding my pork. This is where I'd normally reintroduce the bacon I would have removed earlier before cooking the chicken. Now the chicken goes back in, except for the breast meat. In goes the wine in which the chicken was marinating. But I reserve about a half a cup. I add the thyme and parsley. Now I lid the brazier and place it in the oven preheated at 325 degrees Fahrenheit. If this were a broiler chicken, I'd have it in the oven for about an hour. Since this is a slightly older bird, the meat is tougher and needs about 2 hours or so for braising. I put the breast meat back in the wine to marinate while the dark meat is braising. A key part of the strategy here is not adding the breasts to the brazier with the legs and thighs. Instead, put the breasts back in the wine marinade that we reserved. The white meat cooks so much more quickly than the dark meat in the chicken that putting the breasts in the brazier for it to braise with the dark meat for the entire hour that the dark meat is in there is going to overcook that white breast meat. After the dark meat braises for an hour, I pull the brazier out of the oven, and that's when I add the breast meat back in and let them cook all together for the last 20 minutes. Here's where we take this thing primal and veer off course from the French way. You essentially make a compound butter with flour. In French, it's called this. Of course, being a primal dish, we're not using any grains or legumes, so I'm going to make a slurry out of arrowroot powder. Arrowroot powder does not behave like wheat flour. You can't just make a normal slurry, throw it in at the end, and thicken the sauce that way. Arrowroot will start to thicken your gravy or your sauce when you add it at the end, just like wheat flour will. But if you leave the heat on, the arrowroot actually starts to loosen back up, and then you lose your desired effect. So the key here to get arrowroot powder to work right is to turn the heat off on the brazier, let it rest, and then add the slurry, stirring it in. And as the temperature of the dish starts to drop, the arrowroot powder won't start separating and breaking down and losing its consistency. To make the slurry, all I'm doing is taking about a tablespoon of the arrowroot powder, putting it into a small glass jar, and then adding some water and mixing it together. I add small amounts of the slurry and stir it in until the sauce thickens. To keep this primal, I'm serving this over mashed celery root. Doesn't this look amazing? It's gonna be awesome. Alright, little buddy, are you ready to try it?
And what I don't like, celery root. Not good. I hate celery root.
You don't like the celery root.
No, I sure don't.
Try about a chicken.
Chicken, And for the celery root, thumbs down.